Good day, APUSHers. This is Mr. Connor checking in with a little review of the colonial period, 1607 to 1754. This will be the first of 3 parts. I'm dividing it into about 3 50-year periods, just for the sake of convenience. And hope you're doing well. Hope you're staying safe, staying in, keeping distance, and let's flatten that curve. So let's go back to the colonial period, and what you're going to get in this particular one is some context and themes for the first 50 years. I'm going to compare and contrast basically the New England and Chesapeake, because if I was making a 45-minute AP test and was going to have a colonial question, I'd do Chesapeake and New England. Not saying that's what it will be, but that's what I do. So, in my 1970s retro Red Sox hat, because it would have been opening day yesterday, let's take it away. So first of all, let's just take a look at this for a second, because these colonies we're talking about are super small. The presentation yesterday was about Spain and their giant empire covering 2 continents, and here are these tiny colonies huddled in the northeast part of North America. There's many of them. They're not all English, you might notice. Some are Dutch, there's a Swedish one in there, there's a French one. So they're disjointed, not connected. They look towards Europe. They're not looking at each other. They're not hanging out from Boston to Jamestown or anything like that. So you wouldn't guess that, the United States of America. There'll be this big, strong nation emerging from this. I think it's worth noting how small these are in the great scheme of things at the time. So, who's who in New England and Chesapeake, why are they coming, and and who are they? So, looking at the Chesapeake, broadly speaking, it's young, poor, or at least definitely not wealthy, single men seeking money. Or, by seeking money, if they're poor and they're seeking something, they're probably out of work at home, don't have a lot of opportunities, and, here's a chance to do something. And at the same time, England would love to unload some of these people. They're sort of worried about an unruly population. So, seek thy fortune in the Chesapeake, which promised to have the riches of Spain, and of course, as we're going to see, does not. And then, by contrast, New England, and this is mostly contrast, not a lot to compare here. You have family groups coming over instead of individual men. You got middle-class people. Reverend ministers, doctors, lawyers, Pat Lyon blacksmith types. That's who's coming over. And they're Puritans. They're seeking to create a religious society. Their phrase, if you recall, is sitting on a hill. They want to be a model to the rest of the world, which if you go back and look at that map is kind of a joke that this tiny little colony will be a model that the rest of the world is looking at. But here's a point of comparison. The Chesapeake people went there seeking money. The Puritans still want to make money. The phrase for God and for profit, it's not considered a contradiction to serve God, but if you happen to make money, that's okay too. It's not a shame. You just don't want to live above your means. You don't want to buy silk scarves if you're poor. That might get you called a witch. Which we'll see later. All right, in terms of what the geography is like and how it affects the economy, the Chesapeake is very good land for plantation-based agriculture. And within about 4 years, after starting for a few years, they start cultivating tobacco, which becomes a huge cash crop, and pretty much their basis of their 17th century economy. And the labor system in this economy is indentured servants. These men come over, they can't pay their way, so they pay back their passage by working for X number of years, anywhere from 5 to 7 or maybe up, with the promise of, getting some land afterwards so they can start their own tobacco plantations. So that's that system. And early on, you might remember from September, really high death rate. It's like 80% over the first 20 years. Just so the odds do not favor you'll actually live. If you do live, you can probably do pretty well. So it's a real gamble. By contrast, New England doesn't have the geography for plantation-based agriculture, kind of rocky soil. So it's more small farms there, more self-sufficient. They're not going to be, New England doesn't have anything to export that England wants. They grow the same types of crops, basically. So there's no tobacco magic thing there. They are tradespeople. We're going to see later they're going to move into shipbuilding and forestry, although not so much early on. Again, that goes to their middle class. And they tend to live in towns. Chesapeake is much more spread out with the plantations. New England, they tend to center in these small towns where everyone kind of gets to know each other, which is good and bad, of course, if you recall the Crucible and witches. Here's a point of comparison between the two. Both are going to view Native Americans as inferior people. Both rely on them early on, and then will turn on them and want to control the area. In the case of the Chesapeake, they want to take more Indian lands so they can plant more tobacco. It's an economic motivation. And the big pushback after 15 years is the Great Indian Uprising of 1622, which is a short-term success for Native Americans. But once the English reinforce it, it ends up being a long-term failure. And they will have their hostilities, but that one is pretty much the only major resistance en masse by Native Americans. The Puritans in New England also view Native Americans as inferior, much more with a religious bent. They'd like to convert them, look at them as savages. They would like to take their land, more of a sense of Puritan work ethic, like we could do better than they could. What do they do with this? They're not good, sturdy yeoman farmers like us. And they have their own hostilities. The Pequot War in the 1630s is a massive massacre of Native Americans. There'll be about a 40-year peace after that till we get to King Philip's War. And there is some effort to convert Native Americans. They set up these places called praying towns. Natick was a praying town, where their idea is they want Indians to live away from their families and people and learn English ways in these special towns. So it never takes off wholly on a massive scale, but it is there, and that's something they're definitely not doing in the Chesapeake. All right, in terms of their culture, if I had to sum up the Chesapeake in one word, it's individualism. I don't want to say, modern capitalism dates from the Chesapeake, although you could go there. But as I wrote here on the screen, let's not overstate this. If we went back in time, we'd find the Chesapeake far more communal looking than we live today. But it's much more people out to make their own economic benefit. If you think about who came over, that kind of makes sense. Whereas in New England, it's more communalism, which is a nice element, that everyone's in this together. We're all one people, sitting on a hill, we're bound together. But you also probably recall from the court records, there's a lot of conformity elements. People get into other people's business and not spy on each other, but they're wary of each other. They're intolerant of dissent. Aunt Hutchinson and Roger Williams get kicked out of Massachusetts and go to Rhode Island. Even Connecticut is formed by some people who want to have their own take on Puritanism. So they're not, they don't welcome other peoples there. They want to establish their own religious community, but they don't welcome others who are also seeking religious freedom. Their way is the only way as they see it. And I put deputy husband here. This could be in the Chesapeake as well, but early on there's such an imbalance between men and women in the Chesapeake that it just doesn't matter as much, I would say. Deputy husband is, you might recall, this idea that New England women, even though they are considered inferior in some ways, they can look after the husband's farm or business while he's away. That's considered a sort of spiritual equal, and it translates into this economic equal and a deputy or temporary basement. I just think it's an interesting cultural development. Adds some nuance to New England. All right, so even though it's a 50-year period of established major themes, it's not exactly the same as the beginning by the end. So for tobacco, and yes, it is, you can make good money, but after about 10-15 years, it starts to level off. As production goes up, prices will start going down. It's not this rare exotic item, it's much more plentiful. So really only about the first 10-15 years is when you can really sort of make a fortune. And by then it's sort of established who the bigger planters are, and they're going to have the best land, the biggest land. And yes, people still come over, but I'd say the boom years are the early years, which of course are also the years you're most likely to die. So that's a real trade-off. In New England, I'd say the biggest change is there's about this 10-year period where most of the people head over from England. They call it the Great Migration. This is when the City on a Hill sermon is created. It's on the boat in 1629. So massive period of migration, and then that's about it. And then New England just reproduces naturally, much healthier. There's no 80% death rate in New England. People lived in their 70s, not uncommonly. So I think that's the big change, is you don't have a influx of people except for about this 10-year period, and then it's more natural population growth. And the French are starting to make an appearance. You saw it on the map there. But by 1650, they're a small presence, fur trading in what we would call Canada now. So they're there, and there's an awareness. And in case the Puritans, they also know the French are Catholics, and that in their Protestant Puritanism is an enemy as much as the Native Americans are. So they're very wary of that. Whereas I'd say the Virginians are more wary of Spain to the south. As I see here, Spain is still there. They're still the model, still their mighty big empire. They may have been past their peak, but I don't think people know that in 1620, especially for the English. They still look like a big, mighty empire. So that is my basic overview of this first 50 years. And I'm not going to unleash a short answer yet. I'm going to do that after the third video. But like I said, I hope you're doing well. Send me any questions. And I will see you in another video pretty shortly. Bye-bye.